Eye on China. Some U.S. lawmakers say they want to hold the communist country accountable for its role in the coronavirus crisis. How Beijing is responding. COVID-19 and children. How the pandemic may affect the future of education. Mary, our mother. The head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops tells us about tomorrow's service dedicated to the Blessed Virgin. And recipe for success. A Franciscan friar and baking champion gives us pointers on faith and food. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, April 30th, 2020. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. We are following several new developments tonight in the months-long war against the coronavirus. Another governor paid a visit to the White House today to talk battle strategy, and millions of more Americans have lost their jobs. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports remotely.
Today, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy thanked President Donald Trump at the White House for the federal partnership in battling the coronavirus, that state among the hardest hit.
We're going to have a vaccine, and we're going to fast track it like you've never seen before. If we come up with a vaccine, I think they probably will.
At the White House, President Donald Trump and New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy.
We did more tests than any other country anywhere in the world. And I think they told me yesterday a number, if you add up the rest of the world, we've done more testing.
Against that backdrop, more than 3.8 million laid-off workers applied for unemployment benefits last week. Over 30 million people have filed for jobless aid since the pandemic started.
Next week's jobs report is expected to show that the unemployment rate, which was at 50-year lows just 2 months ago, has surged into double digits.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell says this is a crisis the U.S. has never seen before.
We're going to see economic data for the second quarter that's worse than any data we've seen for the economy. And they're a direct consequence of the disease and the measures that we're taking to protect ourselves from it.
Also making headlines, a non-virus related story.
When I looked at what they did to him, they tormented him. Dirty cops tormented General Flynn.
The president supporting his former national security advisor after Michael Flynn's lawyers released internal FBI documents they claim show the FBI was trying to entrap him.
What they did to General Flynn, and by the way, to Roger Stone and to others, was a disaster and a disgrace, and it should never be allowed to happen in this country again.
Also, federal social distancing guidelines expire today, but states will continue to impose their own restrictions. California shutting down beaches and state parks tomorrow, but one sheriff there says he will not enforce that. And mortgage rates, Tracy, are at an all-time low.
All right. Thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. As U.S. senators gear up to return to Capitol Hill next week, some Republicans are pushing for direct retaliation against China for its disinformation about the coronavirus pandemic. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
Well, Tracy, the director of national intelligence says that U.S. intelligence agencies do not believe that the COVID-19 virus was in fact made inside of a Chinese lab. However, they're still looking into the possibility that it may have escaped from a Chinese lab. Some lawmakers want to hold China accountable, and one lawmaker in particular who I spoke with says China should not be trusted.
I think we're compromised every day by China.
Republican Congressman Devin Nunes tells me the House Intelligence Committee has been waving red flags about China for the past decade.
We were actually the first ones to warn about using Chinese telecommunications technology because it allows the Chinese to listen in on our phone calls and grab our emails from all over the globe, which is why they've been undercutting other telecommunications companies for over a decade now.
This morning, a spokesman for the Chinese government said, "We admonish the American politicians to stop blaming China and to spend their time and energy on better controlling the epidemic situation at home." Senate Democrats have stayed largely silent about any repercussions the communist country should face, but Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham is pleading with Democrats to hold China accountable. He says China must do three things: fully cooperate with investigations into the virus's origins, close all wet markets selling wildlife, and release jailed Hong Kong democracy advocates from Chinese prisons. And Asian foreign policy expert Gordon Chang has advised,
we've got to make sure that our global supply chains are resilient. And that means, for instance, making things in America for Americans. But also, I think that we need to deter China. And to deter China, I think we should be starting to seize Chinese assets.
It's not punishment. I think it's just smart governing.
Senator Graham is also calling for the U.S. to cancel its $1 trillion debt with China, slapping them with, quote, pandemic tariffs. But critics that I spoke with say that that would have devastating effects against the global market. Tracy?
Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reporting for us tonight. Thanks so much, Eric. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio was under fire after lashing out at mourners reportedly gathered for the funeral of a Hasidic rabbi. That gathering took place in defiance of the city's social distancing guidelines. These images show some of the mourners tightly packed on the street as police came to disperse the crowd. Some, but reportedly not all, of those that gathered wore face coverings. After ordering and overseeing this dispersal of the mourners, Mayor de Blasio tweeted this: "My message to the Jewish community and all communities is this simple. The time for warnings has passed." Calling the large funeral gathering, quote, absolutely unacceptable, adding, "What I saw will not be tolerated so long as we are fighting the coronavirus." Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Monse Alvarado, Vice President and Executive Director at Beckett, a nonprofit law firm dedicated to protecting religious freedom. Monse, thanks so much for coming on the show again. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. So good to be with you, Tracy.
So, Monse, Mayor de Blasio is receiving a lot of criticism for his remarks. What was your reaction when you first heard them?
You know, it's unfortunate. The first time that you hear someone make a comment about the pandemic in haste, which is something that he did a couple of weeks ago, you think, okay, he's trying to respond to a crisis, and you try to explain it because it's not excusable. But then all of a sudden, you sit there and you realize that it really is targeting, that he's singling out one community, and that's unacceptable. There is no way that should be okay, and that should be in any way allowed to stand.
I know the mayor angered a lot of people, in particular the Jewish community in New York, many of whom say his comments generalize the city's Jewish population. Now, others say his comments were especially insensitive in light of recent rash of hate crimes targeting Jews in New York. What are your thoughts, and do you think those comments, Monse, could lead to further divisions and possibly even worse?
The role of our civil leaders is to unite us. And anytime that you have comments like this, you are inciting both violence and maybe even, and as you said, division. That is problematic. In times of crisis, we don't forfeit our civil liberties or our civility. I think that's one piece that we have to remember, that we want to act united, and that our leaders should be coming together to protect us. And Ted Cruz, I know the senator just asked the Department of Justice to look into the way that these laws are being formulated, these shelter-in-place laws, but also just looking out for precisely this kind of targeting, these kind of religious communities being singled out because of what they believe and who they are, and the long record of hatred against them within the cities and local communities.
Monse, we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to ask you this. You know, in his defense, de Blasio said that his responses were not about singling out the Orthodox Jewish community because of its religion, but were out of frustration over seeing the large size of gatherings. However, some people say the mayor is being a little hypocritical because no warnings or summonses were issued to those New Yorkers who watched the flyovers honoring healthcare workers on that very same day. Now, that said, do you think there's a double standard when it comes to issues of faith?
He has a bad record with the Jewish community, and precisely the violence that we've seen against that community tells us that an apology for hurtful comments, as he put it, is just not enough. A pandemic is not an excuse for comments to be made that make people feel like they are not safe in their own homes.
Monse, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Hope to see you again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
A stalemate over forming a government in Israel for the last year and a half may be coming to an end after Benjamin Netanyahu has cleared to become prime minister once again. But dozens of black shirt protesters in Israel today showed their opposition to Netanyahu. The attorney general issued an opinion saying that there are not legal grounds to stop Netanyahu from forming a government. Netanyahu is facing bribery charges. Another group of protesters rallying outside of the Supreme Court waved Israeli flags in support of the prime minister. In Japan, a lot of people are not staying at home despite the state of emergency. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is announcing an extension of the lockdown in Japan. The quarantine period was supposed to end May 6, but he now says he is consulting with health officials on when to lift the lockdown. In Brazil, hospitals are struggling to cope with a number of patients with COVID-19. Doctors and nurses in Brazil have complained about the lack of testing, as well as a shortage of protective equipment. At least 12 healthcare workers in Brazil have died. The Vatican has formally closed the latest investigation into the 1983 disappearance of the 15-year-old daughter of a Vatican worker. The latest cold case of Emanuela Orlandi's mysterious disappearance resurfaced last year after an anonymous tip that she was buried in a Vatican cemetery. But an investigation found nothing. Today, a Vatican judge closed the investigation. 300 teachers from 21 countries met virtually to discuss the effects of COVID-19 on children and education. More than 3 hours last week, the teachers discussed the current academic situation and what the future may hold. The meeting was organized by Scholas Occurrentes, a global education organization launched by then Archbishop José Bergoglio before he became Pope Francis. Martina Amengual, coordinator of Scholas Occurrentes International Headquarters, joins us now from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Thank you for joining us, Martina.
Hi, thank you very much for having us.
In this global cyber meeting with teachers, what were some of the experiences and key ideas that were shared?
Well, we are doing these virtual encounters with students from 17 different countries, from 60 cities around the world. And in these scholars' experiences, they are sharing with different peers how they are going through this situation that is affecting all of them and their families, how they are going through these changes and what solutions they can implement in their communities to attend this main problem. Scholas was born from a crisis 20 years ago, and now we are in a new crisis, and we are trying to give a response through these virtual encounters. But at that moment, 20 years ago, we already believed that education was in crisis. So this pandemic puts over the table something that was happening some years before, because we believe the most of the students of the world feel a lack of sense in the education they are receiving, that it's so traditional and it's focused on concepts and in information, but it's not focused on the feelings and the way of expressions of the young people. So we believe this crisis put all of this over the table, and it's going to be a new opportunity to rethink education.
I know Scholas also organized a virtual meeting with over 100 students around the world. Can you tell us what the students shared about their experience during this time?
They are sharing a lot of isolation, anxiety. They are nervous. Some of them in vulnerable context. Maybe they don't have space at home. They don't have to whom to share what they are feeling. So we started to measure the impact of these virtual encounters, where they find a space where they could share what they were feeling with people that it's in other part of the world, but is going through the same problem. And in these results, we found out that there was an increase through these virtual encounters of their motivation a 52% of increase in their desire to do things for others, a 68% in their feeling of joy and hope. And at the same time, there was a decrease after these encounters of their feeling of loneliness, of nervousness, of sadness. So we think this is a space that is being very important for them in this context.
Well, Martina, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate the time. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, bishops in the United States are taking part in a special service tomorrow. And Pope Francis says the best missionaries need more than words. We'll explain. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference invites all bishops to join him tomorrow in reconsecrating the nation to the protection of the Blessed Virgin Mary. In a letter sent to all American bishops, Archbishop José Gomez writes, every year the Church seeks the special intercession of the Mother of God during the month of May. This year, we seek the assistance of Our Lady all the more earnestly as we face together the effects of the global pandemic. Archbishop Gomez joins me now by Skype to talk more about the reconsecration. Your Excellency, thank you so much for speaking with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on the program.
Absolutely. Can we talk about the symbolism of doing this at the beginning of May and why this reaffirmation is so important right now?
Sure. I think it's very important because we are in this very challenging situation of the coronavirus pandemic. And it's been so challenging for all of us and for the whole world. And I think it's important to especially go to the intercession of Mary, our Blessed Mother, to be with us during this challenging time. We, the bishops of the United States and Canada, decided that it will be a good moment at the beginning of the month of May, that is the month of Mary, to reconsecrate our nations to our Blessed Mother, Mother of the Church.
Well, as you just mentioned, the bishops of Canada are also going to be consecrating their own country to Mary at the same time. Can you talk about the significance of that?
Well, I think it's very important because it's the bishops of at least a good part of North America. And I think the bishops of Mexico and South America, they did a consecration to the Blessed Mother on Easter Sunday. So I think it is important for the whole continent to be consecrated, to reconsecrate to our Blessed Mother at this time. I think it is a time of being together. The pandemic is a world pandemic, so I think it is important for all of us in our country, in the United States, but also with other countries all over the world, and especially Canada, to be together during this challenging time. Trusting in the intercession of Mary, our Blessed Mother.
Oh, we here at EWTN are just absolutely thrilled to be carrying tomorrow's service. What key role does the collective power of prayer have in times like this?
Well, I think it is clear that God is listening to us, we can say in a positive way that God especially listens to Mary, our Blessed Mother. So I think for all of us to go to pray to Mary, our Blessed Mother, it's as I was saying the other day, that when we have a challenge in our lives, the first thing that we do, as least as what I did when I was a kid, I went to my mother. So we have a challenge, like the one that we have, we go to Mary, our Blessed Mother, in prayer, asking her to talk to God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, that we receive the grace of strength during this challenging time, and pray for the end of the pandemic.
I know that you recently recorded a message specifically for healthcare workers. Would you mind talking to us about that and why you felt called to do that?
Well, I think it's clear to us that the healthcare workers are a big help for all of us, and especially for the people who are sick, and they are putting themselves in challenging situations. So we are very grateful to them for their generosity in their ministry to accompany the people that are sick. And I think it is important. They are really real heroes in our world, in our society at this time. So We're grateful to them, and at the same time, we want to tell them that they are in our prayers and they have our total support in this challenging time.
Well, Your Excellency, before we let you go, what's your message to the faithful right now?
I think my message is a message of hope, especially because we know that God is with us, and we have the intercession of Mary, our Blessed Mother. I think in the history of the Church, we have seen the presence of Mary always, but especially in challenging times. We think of the presence of Mary, our Blessed Mother, during the crucifixion. As painful as it was for her, she was there. And then we see her also on Pentecost when the mission of the Church started. So I think it's important for all of us to have that hope that we are part of the mission of Jesus in the world, and that we can count on the intercession of Mary, our Blessed Mother. So my message is of hope, and at the same time to renew our commitment to be faithful disciples of our Lord Jesus Christ, missionary disciples, as Pope Francis likes to say.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on. Archbishop José Gomez, thank you again.
Well, thank you. God bless you.
Pope Francis reminds the faithful only God can convert others, but we can help by how we live our lives.
Testimonianza e preghiera vanno insieme.
At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says preaching the gospel is only one part of missionary work. The other is to be an example of Christian charity and prayer. He also says that we must remember God is the one who changes hearts and draws people closer to him. A reminder, EWTN broadcasts Mass throughout the day, including the Pope's daily Mass from the Vatican. Mass airs from Irondale, Alabama at 8 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. Eastern. We also have special programming throughout the day, including the Pope's Mass. Schedules can be found at EWTN.com, and there you can also find Eucharistic adoration throughout the day. Up next, a baking champion and Franciscan friar gives us a taste of the joy of serving others. Finally tonight, we are all spending a lot more time at home, no doubt about that, and for some that can mean picking up a new hobby. One Franciscan friar says his love of baking draws him closer to God. Correspondent Mark Irons has that story. Mark.
Tracy, spending more time at home could mean even more time in our kitchens trying out new recipes. Well, we learned a few things from a Franciscan student brother, a baking champ who is passionate about preparing good food for God's glory.
Let me combine coconut, dulce de leche, and some really nice cream.
Topping off some cakes at the Capuchin Franciscan Friary in Washington, D.C., Brother Andrew Corriente shares what first inspired him to roll up his habit sleeves and start baking.
The short answer is God.
7 years ago, in the early days of his Franciscan formation, his initial venture into the kitchen was inspired during prayer.
The thought came up to me, which was, why don't you cook something?
For Brother Andrew, his faith and baking mix very well and have even proven quite successful.
The winner is Brother Andrew!
Crowned this year's champ for the holiday edition of ABC's The Great American Baking Show.
I couldn't believe what happened.
Brother Andrew called his experience on the show stressful but rewarding, and his desire to serve others brings continual fulfillment.
For our Franciscan spirituality, we emphasize helping the poor.
As part of his ministry, Brother Andrew prepares regular meals for day laborers.
A beautiful and nice meal that's prepared with integrity and love.
Take a deep breath. Okay, breathe.
Cooking provides a spiritual exercise for Brother Andrew, teaching him perseverance when recipes don't turn out as planned.
It's okay. It's still together. It's okay, guys.
All right.
Whenever I bake, it's always a constant reminder of my humility. We may fall down, but as long as we get right back up over and over and over again, God sees that, and he loves that.
At the Friary, Brother Andrew is keeping busy. And for all those under stay-at-home orders looking for a new hobby, a word of advice from the faithful baker himself.
Take it up only if it's something that'll bring you joy and excitement and bring love and charity to other people as well.
I'm told Brother Andrew's fellow Franciscans are enjoying the fruits of his labor. No surprise there. And he actually sent me a recipe for the topping you saw him put on the cake there, dulce de leche. He said it would also make a good fruit dip. So here it is. I've got this apple. I got to be honest, Tracy, it turned out pretty well.
Well, Mark, you're going to have to save some of that for all of us here at News Nightly. We want to try it, too. Thanks so much. Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. And we thank all of you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.